Now, there seems to be consensus that the world is headed for a recession. Now, some of the pundits are blaming this on the Ukrainian-Russian war, while others are looking at the spike in the oil and gas prices. Now, whatever the reasons, what's happening globally is now impacting the domestic market, and specifically the education sector. What we are picking from local reports is that a number of schools are up for sale, while others are barely surviving. Now, this week, we'll pick the mind of one of the players in this sector to find out what could have gone wrong domestically, but then also how best can those still surviving ride the storm.
Now, to begin with, you must understand what the cost is and how different schools are today than they were before. Schools currently need a lot to operate, unlike it was maybe in the days when some of us were in school. Today you need to have a lot of infrastructure at school. You must have very good buildings, you must have school buses and very, very many others. Now, that pushes schools to get some credit from financial institutions, since they can't save that money on a timely basis and be able to acquire that much. Schools in Kampala need a lot of space, yet you can't find 5 acres which are on sale. Meaning schools are always looking at a way of how they can expand, how they can be able to buy out some neighbors and be able to acquire some property. Now, because of that, schools find themselves having loans, and which loans some of them were able to service before the coming of COVID. When COVID came in, that meant that we had 2 years of inactivity, and 2 years of inactivity meant the multiplication of interest of those 2 years. Now, unfortunately, when we came back from COVID, many banks never scrapped, neither did they waive that interest. We ended up, and schools ended up having to compound the interest of 2 years, which was really very, very big for some of them. Now, another issue that maybe happened, that since COVID and the first lockdown found us in the mid of the term, many schools ended up closing that term or going for lockdown before clearing many dates. Now, there are many dates which were uncleared, and yet schools could not collect the pending school fees from their parents. Another issue also that happened that made the situation worse is that last year in the 2021, when schools opened, we were allowed to only operate a one-class school, which was very, very expensive because we ended up operating in losses. Leaving that aside, we found out that the other datas that were still demanding, the schools ended up kept on demanding, banks kept on demanding, URA has never waived any taxes in that period. So schools opened up this year when some of those children that had dates, some of them actually left. And schools ended up operating with lesser numbers than it was before. That became a big problem because many schools have less than they used to have, and yet they have a lot to be paid and to pay out. So that caused a big deficit, since many of them cannot now be able to have enough to be able to move. Now, because of that, many schools found themselves in a precarious situation. They had to open up and be able to offer good services, unfortunately with less incomes as far as now is concerned. When schools opened up again, because banks never waived their interest, they kept on demanding same way it was before. Unfortunately, schools could not have enough to give in that much. That led to deficits. Schools can no longer have and make the deposits, the loan deposits, as they were earlier agreed upon. Yes, some banks did some restructuring, but restructuring there was not a waiver. Restructuring was just pushing the date ahead, and when we opened up the schools, banks could not be any patient to the schools. Now, because of that, some school proprietors could not manage to pay. Like I said, they have less numbers of children, and they have less incomes coming in, less revenue coming in, and hence they can't operate as they used to do before. Since the last projections that were made as we were acquiring the loans were based on a different picture than what is currently existing. After all that challenge, unfortunately, when we opened this year, we are hit by a rise of prices that has happened globally, meaning that the profit margin in schools has become lower than ever before. Schools can no longer pay the loans because the profit margin is too little and what is left is too little for the school to be able to operate. Because of that, some banks, I've read in the media, in the news, that some banks have already begun taking over some schools, as others actually were taken even before the schools were allowed to open in this country. What needs to be done is that school proprietors need to understand that the situation is far different from what we had before. Many parents are unable to clear all their school dues in time, and yet you're supposed to keep spending if a school is going to stay afloat. What you have to do and that they have to learn is to ensure that make a lot of good, serious budgeting to consider working on the major key components of a school, key services and goods that we need to be able to move. These are not times of making a lot of infrastructure changes than we had before. This may not be a time of buying many school buses like we used to do before. These are times of prioritizing those key things that you can't do without. I want to also ask school proprietors to ensure that they maintain a good banking relationship with their bankers, to ensure that they can negotiate for a restructure of loans. If you find yourself suffocating with a loan, don't just keep quiet. Please go to the bank, find a way of how they can restructure the loan. It can be pushed for a longer period of time, which is in long run expensive, but at least we must be able to come out of this. Coming out of this, you'll be able to find ways of how to restructure maybe and pay, but you must be able to come out of this. Since the inflation is high, parents cannot increase schools. It is not the right time to increase school fees. Be able to maintain your parents. Just ensure that you work within your means and pay all that you can. More especially those debts that have to do with interests should be considered first, and then when the times become green again, we shall be able to enjoy.
Besides effort to improve mobility along the northern corridor, that is Mombasa to Kampala, Uganda has over the past 5 years been intentional at exploring new routes to the sea. One such option that the country has been keenly looking at is the Central Corridor, running from Bokassa in Luzira, through Lake Victoria to Mwanza in Tanzania, and then to Dar es Salaam. This is against a backdrop of the fact that the bulk of Ugandan exports and imports travel by sea, mainly through the port of Mombasa, which accounts for over 80% of the goods coming into the country and getting out. From an economic strategic point of view, Uganda seeks to have multiple reliable access to the sea, and several neighboring countries are positioning themselves to offer the alternatives. The latest being Djibouti, which last week dangled a tempting option.
Djibouti to Kampala through Ethiopia is about 870 kilometers by road. Other than the challenges in Ethiopia about security, I think Djibouti is nearer than Dar es Salaam, which is about 1,600 kilometers. So if the security is guaranteed, I think we'll make use of this route. And the language, they do speak French, but the French are better than us. Most French colonies do teach English as a language. So don't expect to go to Djibouti and feel out of way. You'll have people to talk to and you'll do business.
This is coming at a time when Tanzania has invested immensely diplomatically and in terms of strengthening the necessary infrastructure to divert a portion of the country's imports from the overly dominant northern corridor that runs through Mombasa. The Djibouti delegation is anchoring its offer on its economic free trade zones that have attracted, among others, huge investments from China, a major trading partner of Uganda, considering the fact that the bulk of imports into the country emanate from China. It has commenced engagements engaging Kampala diplomats and the business community in this drive.
Uganda Embassy in Addis Ababa also is for Djibouti. So we're just waiting to link again. So we need to say some few words which concern business trade between the governments. And Ambassador Rebecca, and 2 days before, she was in Djibouti. She had meeting with the Minister of the Foreign Affairs in Djibouti and the Business Chamber of Commerce and the Minister of the Trades.
Djibouti runs one of the continent's most vibrant free trade zones, spanning over 43 square kilometers and playing host to a number of external industries. It is this, a favorable tax regime and a shorter distance from its ports to Kampala, which is about 870 kilometers by road, compared to the Dar es Salaam route of 600 kilometers that the country is dangling to get Kampala's attention.